Can you imagine being excluded from your own grandson's birthday party, all because someone thinks you smell bad? That's what my daughter-in-law told me as she barred me from attending. Heartbroken and frustrated, I made a decision that would alter the course of that celebration. I changed the locks on my house. Now, there won't be a party, at least not the one they had planned. I've read countless stories here, but penning my own feels daunting. Where do I even begin? I'm a 66-year-old widower, having lost my beloved wife 3 years ago. My days are often filled with loneliness, though my grandson has been a bright spot in my life. He's turning 1 this Sunday, and I recently learned, through a neighbor of all people, that there's a grand birthday party planned for him, a party I wasn't invited to. The news hit me like a thunderbolt. My neighbor casually mentioned that his granddaughter had received an invitation, complete with a promise of dinner and a +1 option. I couldn't believe it. My son and his wife aren't exactly flush with cash, so how were they pulling off such an extravagant affair? When my neighbor showed me a photo of the card, my heart sank. The party wasn't just happening, it was going to be a big event. And yet, there was no sign of an invitation for me. Trying to shake off my growing anxiety, I visited my grandson. When I arrived, he was playing alone in the grass while my daughter-in-law scrolled through her phone, barely acknowledging me. I picked him up and played with him, his laughter momentarily soothing my troubled mind. But she continued to watch us with her usual cold indifference. You see, my daughter-in-law has never liked me. She comes from a wealthy family, while I've spent my life running a modest mechanic workshop. Maybe it's about money or status, but whatever her reasons, her disdain has always been palpable. And yet, I've done everything I could to support my son's family, especially during tough times. Last year, when my son lost his job, their finances crumbled. They couldn't pay rent and were on the brink of eviction. I opened my home to them, moving into my workshop to give them space. Despite my sacrifices, I was met with disdain rather than gratitude. When I asked my son about the party, his evasive responses only confirmed my suspicions. The car was loaded with decorations, yet he tried to downplay everything. Then, his wife, Sandra, exploded. Are you seriously upset about not getting an invitation to a child's birthday party? Grow up! Her words stung, but I kept my cool, directing my frustration toward my son. Are you okay with this? With your wife excluding your father from your son's life? I demanded. His silence said it all. Sandra held the reins in their marriage, and he lacked the strength to push back. But here's the kicker, I'd unknowingly funded this lavish party. Last month, my son asked for money, claiming he needed to cover a car payment. Now, I realized the truth, I'd been duped. I confronted him, laying bare my hurt and disappointment. You lied to me, used my money for a party I wasn't even invited to. How can you justify this? His excuses fell flat. By the end of our conversation, I made 2 things clear. I wanted my money back, and I wouldn't tolerate being treated like an outsider in my own family. Update. This incident has taught me one painful truth. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, some people will never appreciate you. But I refuse to be silent or invisible. I may be 66, but I still deserve respect, and I'll fight for it. Revenge is a dish best served, but this time, I chose differently. Sandra, my daughter-in-law, had crossed every imaginable line of toxicity and manipulation. The day it all unraveled was my grandson's birthday. I sat alone in the corner of my workshop, drowning in a swirl of bitter thoughts and brooding, when my phone buzzed. It was my son. Foolishly, I allowed a flicker of hope to light up my chest. Was his guilty conscience finally awakening? Was he calling to invite me to the celebration? Desperation took over, and I even bought a gift for my grandson, thinking that if the invitation came at the last moment, I'd be ready to rush over. How pathetic, right? Yet, even if they didn't call, I reasoned that my grandson deserved the gift regardless. But no, reality had a cruel twist in store. The call wasn't an invitation, it was a request to babysit my grandson. My son claimed he had urgent work at the office, and Sandra had left to pick up her parents from the airport. My heart sank. Her parents, flying in from states away, were invited and celebrated, yet I, living just a block away, was deliberately excluded. The audacity was staggering. Still, I couldn't leave my grandson alone. I rushed over and found him in his crib, helpless and unaware of the storm brewing in my chest. I played with him, trying to mask my anguish, when Sandra called. She mistook me for my son, barking instructions about decorations. When she realized it was me, her voice turned venomous. "Why are you in my house?" she spat. I explained my son's urgency, but she didn't care. She demanded I leave immediately. Her parents couldn't see me. She claimed I was too filthy with grease-stained hands and the stench of oil. Humiliation swept over me like a tidal wave. I couldn't stay any longer. Cradling my grandson one last time, I decided to leave. As I closed the door, an idea struck me like lightning. This wasn't her house, it was my house. The very roof over her head, the wall she took for granted, I had given it all to them out of goodwill. And now, I'd had enough. I called my workers. They arrived with toolboxes, ready to execute my plan. We changed the locks, packed their belongings into boxes from my workshop, and placed everything on the porch. As I held my grandson on the front lawn, I waited for Sandra's return. The moment her car pulled up, I handed her the baby and turned toward my workshop, her outraged screams chasing after me. Sandra's fury only grew when she discovered the locks had been changed. Her calls and messages flooded my phone, demanding answers. I finally responded, calmly stating, "The house is mine. You're no longer welcome here." Her indignation was almost comedic. She even threatened to call the police, but my son, for once, had a moment of clarity. "That's his house," he snapped. "We can't call the police on him." The days that followed were a whirlwind of drama. My son returned, pleading with tears in his eyes, trying every manipulative tactic he knew. But this time, I stood firm. "No more," I told him. "Your wife's hatred for me runs too deep, and I won't tolerate her toxicity any longer." For the first time, I chose myself over their entitled demands. They might never forgive me, and they might poison my grandson's mind against me, but I've made peace with that. I've sacrificed enough for them. Now, it's time they learn what it means to stand on their own. It was a night that started like any other, but little did I know it would turn into an ordeal I'd never forget. Someone tried to break into my house. Can you imagine? In the dead of night, when the world is cloaked in silence, I heard the unmistakable sound of a window shattering. Startled, I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding like a drum. As an old man and a light sleeper, it doesn't take much to wake me. I grabbed the phone and dialed the police immediately, unsure of who or what I was dealing with. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about my family. No, I thought it was just a burglar, someone desperate enough to invade my home. My workshop holds the only weapon I own, and thankfully, it's locked away. Who knows how things might have escalated if it had been within reach? I shudder to think of it. When the police arrived, they found her, my daughter-in-law. Yes, you read that right. My daughter-in-law, the same woman who had made life increasingly chaotic, was now sneaking into my house in search of my keys. She didn't even try to run when I turned on the lights, probably realizing there was no escape. The officers promptly took her into custody, her last feeble attempt at an apology falling flat as they led her away. The next morning, my son stormed into my house. Furious and defensive, he accused me of overreacting. "How could you do this?" he yelled. "My son needs his mother." The nerve of him to shift the blame onto me. He even had the audacity to ask if I could take care of my grandson while he worked on getting her out of jail. With what money? Their irresponsibility knows no bounds. I stood firm and told him no. In fact, I let him know I was considering calling Child Protective Services, CPS. They were clearly unfit to parent, and I wouldn't stand by as my grandson suffered. And that wasn't an empty threat. After he left, I thought long and hard, and then I made the call. Things have since taken a dramatic turn. My daughter-in-law's father, enraged by his daughter's actions, came to town. As he pieced together the mess she'd created, especially during what was supposed to be a birthday celebration, his disappointment was palpable. He managed to get her out of jail, but the fallout was swift and unforgiving. He cut all ties with her. Now, for the good news, CPS placed my grandson with me. For the time being, I am his guardian, and I couldn't be happier. We've spent precious time together, even celebrating his birthday. His laughter fills the house again, a sound I had dearly missed. While he may be too young to grasp the full weight of what's happening, he senses the change. What happens next? I don't know. But for now, I am cherishing every moment with my grandson, giving him the stability and love he deserves.